I'm Matt Stokes. I'm at Sight Gallery installing In Absence of the Smoky God, which is a 2-channel film installation, an audio work. And it came about through being invited by Sight Gallery and Sensoria to make a work that linked in to Sheffield. So the inspiration behind In Absence of the Smoky God came about really through a number of ways. Part of it was to do with coming across certain locations in Sheffield, particularly the underground location, as a kind of point of refuge. And that was sparked by re-watching Threads. So someone in Sheffield introduced me to Threads, or reintroduced me to Threads, because I remember watching it when I was younger. And Threads is Barry Hines' docudrama about the before, during and after of Holocaust in Sheffield, particularly following 2 families and what happens to those 2 families. So when I was going into some of the underground locations, I saw those almost like sort of underground shelters, very much in the vein of Henry Moore's drawings of the London Underground and the way that those were used for refuge during the Blitz. And I kind of found that that was a good way into then thinking about different worlds that might exist, and particularly drawing from classic science fiction in terms of thinking about those worlds. So 2 important books that I was reading at the time was The Chrysalids by John Wyndham and Time Machine by H.G. Wells, but particularly relating to a lot of other sci-fi literature and films. When there's a big disaster that happens, there's quite often a split in society, so you get 2 different societies which exist. So I wrote descriptions about the 2 worlds and what those worlds might be like, what they might look like, what the societies might be like, what roles the people within those societies might carry out. And really the project went from there. So there's a scene in Threads which is within the post-apocalyptic world, in which there's an exchange between 3 youths. And they're using a language which is a very kind of crude, slang-like language, very simplified. And that was really the starting point behind thinking of what would happen to language in a post-Holocaust world. And started thinking about not only what would happen to language, but what would happen to music as well. So the idea of creating a vocal piece which in some ways suggested a kind of new beginning for music and a new form of language that came out of the post-apocalyptic world. Seemed, well that was the way that the project went. So I came to last year's Sensoria, which is a festival for film, music and digital media. And that was really the start of the project. And from that point, the piece really started to form as an idea, so that it was going to become a film work with a vocal track as the sort of driving force behind the film. And that it would be shot in some ways a little bit like a music video would be made, in that a vocal composition would be created, that would be recorded, and then the film would come as a response to that vocal track. So what you see in the 2-channel film installation are essentially 2 different worlds which coexist, which have come out of the Holocaust at some kind of unspecified time in the future. One society exists in an overground setting, and one society exists in an underground setting. The 2 societies that exist in those settings speak 2 different languages. One language is, in a way, quite crude, a little bit animalistic, and that's the underground society. And there's something which is much more sort of, kind of, in a way, sort of earthy and real about their language, a little bit more kind of folky, and there is an element of folk song which does come into the underground language. And then overground, their language is based much more on tone. So it's much more based around pitch or forms of pitch, whether it's hummed, whether it's a vocal pitch. So I started looking for vocalists and a composer to work on the piece. And I started talking with Ben Gaunt, who's a Sheffield-based composer. And what I really liked about Ben was that, one, he had an interest in sci-fi. He'd worked on a lot of different experimental tracks and just seemed to have a really nice attitude towards the piece and the ideas behind it. And then the 10 vocalists were found through a variety of routes. So initially getting in contact with local choirs, local bands, music groups. And the vocalists who were eventually found come from a whole variety of backgrounds. They all have very different abilities in terms of the way that they use their voice. So that ranges from people who are more in pop music world through to people who are improvisers. And we started working on the track, or the composition for the track, and it came about through 3 workshop sessions. So we started with nothing in terms of a composition, just ideas. Spent a few hours in the first workshop just trying out odd sounds, different ideas for the way we could use people's voices. And then gradually over the next 2 workshops, we just honed down what the composition might be. And then after the 3rd workshop, we had a recording session. The piece was recorded all in one take, so with all 10 vocalists in a room together, so they could all see each other, so it's very much like a live recording. And then the film came about really through that. So what you see in the final installation is there are 2 separate video channels and 2 separate audio channels synchronized together so that the voices work in terms of the timing of when one set of voices stops and starts, or another set of voices stops and starts, or whether they're all going at one time, and the relationship between the voices. So in this room, what you see behind me are the 2 screens. They're quite large screens. And then within the adjacent room, showing some elements of Barry Hines' archive, which belongs to the University of Sheffield Library, and then specifically taking things which relate to threads from the Barry Hines archive. Also in that room are 2 wall texts which are about the 2 societies, which were given to the crew and the vocalists in terms of trying to think about the worlds and the characters and what they might look like. And then a symbol which was used in the overground setting. So really the materials which are in the adjacent gallery are contextual to the film and audio work.